Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Brian Bennett. Here's a very latest look at Hurricane Ian. Winds are 100 miles per hour and it is forecast to move right over Cuba. It's going to become a buzzsaw in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico with winds up to 140 miles per hour. We're already starting to see some of those very far outer rain bands starting to move into our area, although the storm is still quite a ways off. In my video here, my objective is to be able to narrow down where the storm is going as precisely as is possible today. Admittedly, there are a lot of variables and we are going to have to continue to watch it, but I'm going to try to narrow it down for you beyond just this kind of uncertainty from the National Hurricane Center, and also let you know what type of impact we can expect with its landfall. Here's a look at the infrared satellite imagery. The storm is continuing to develop. You're seeing some of the pink colors here close to the center of circulation. That indicates quite a bit of convection, very tall clouds. So the storm is developing very rapidly. I wouldn't be surprised if we're approaching a major hurricane by our 11 p.m. update as the storm approaches western Cuba, and then definitely a major hurricane once it gets into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. Here's a product put out by the National Hurricane Center. This shows the maximum storm surge forecast for the area that's going to be impacted by Hurricane Ian. This graphic is an ominous graphic. I'm not going to lie. It shows what could potentially be somewhat catastrophic conditions if indeed the hurricane continues on its current track, which is to make landfall possibly around Pinellas County or a bit farther north, according to the Hurricane Center. Could we see the hurricane make landfall farther south, Sarasota, Manatee counties? That is feasible, and if that does, that will change this map dramatically. That'll bring the big storm surge farther south, and that'll greatly reduce the storm surge for the Tampa Bay area. So this will be something we have to watch very closely. Storm surge is not something you play around with. You run from the water, you hide from the wind, and storm surge is the most deadly part of a hurricane. Unfortunately, it can be very challenging to predict, but based on the current forecast from the Hurricane Center, they are suggesting 5 to 10 foot storm surge in the bay. That's because the winds will be flowing onshore and funneling into Tampa Bay, and then once it gets into the bay, it has nowhere to go. So the water piles up, potentially between 5 and 10 feet. So the water could be taller if you're standing on the beach than the majority of people that you know. I'm 6'4", it'd still be above my head if it gets up around 10 feet. So massive storm surge is possible that, if it takes its path, could impact and greatly damage thousands of homes and businesses in this very populated area of west central Florida in Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, and Manatee County as well. Still a very respectable 5 to 8 foot surge being forecast between Longboat and Inglewood, 4 to 7 between Inglewood and Bonita Beach. So damaging storm surge also in this area south of Tampa Bay, and some of this may increase a little bit. We may see the higher higher surge totals possible if indeed the hurricane does decide it wants to move inland just a tad farther south, and of course that would reduce the storm surge possibilities for the Tampa Bay area. So something we'll have to watch very closely, and I'm going to show you a bit more here in just a second. Here's the track. It is going to move off to the north-northwest, eventually turning north, and then to the northeast, likely making landfall in the Tampa Bay area. Still a bit of uncertainty in the cone here. Anybody from about Sanibel Island to Apalachicola is still in the cone of uncertainty, but right now the majority of models and the center of the cone does bring the hurricane into Tampa Bay. So here we are. Looking at the shear product right here, you can see that we're in a favorable environment right now for development. So again, I think rapid intensification will continue. We'll continue to watch how quick the storm can develop, but I don't see any reason that it's not going to become a major hurricane right around the time it gets to Cuba, and then again when it's in southeastern parts of the Gulf of Mexico. If the storm happens to make landfall anywhere from Fort Myers to about Anna Maria Island, it could very potentially make landfall as a Cat 3 hurricane. If it makes landfall in Pinellas County or Pasco, probably as a Cat 2. If it makes landfall up around Crystal River, probably a strong Cat 1, maybe a Cat 2 hurricane. If it were just to go straight north into the Panhandle, it would be a weaker hurricane, more like a Cat 1 hurricane, and that is due to the wind shear that's going to be acting on this from a long wave trough up in Canada. So the storm will weaken as it goes north, regardless of whether it's over water or not. But if it stays over water, it'll stay stronger just a tad longer. So that's the current track from the National Hurricane Center. We'll continue to monitor that as well. Here's a zoomed in view. Right now, the Hurricane Center has the center of the cone, the most likely spot for landfall, being very close to Clearwater, but perhaps right around Homosassa Springs. Could this make landfall in Pinellas County? Definitely a possibility, and something we'll have to keep an eye out for. Here's a look at the latest spaghetti plots. And you can see still a wide spread in the models, but the majority of the models are kind of honing in on this vicinity right here, right around Manatee, Pinellas County, as the storm makes landfall in about 72 hours. So we still have a little bit of time to prepare, but that window is closing somewhat rapidly. One thing the models have not disagreed on is the storm intensity. We're still expecting it to be a strong Cat 3 or a Cat 4 as it's in the Gulf of Mexico. One reason this storm is so difficult to forecast is, despite how huge hurricanes are, it's sandwiched between huge synoptic, massive, 1,000-mile wide high-pressure systems that are helping to guide this storm. We have the Bermuda High, and we have a huge high over western Canada and the western United States. Now, winds rotate clockwise around high pressure, so we're getting winds out of the north on this side of the storm, and we're getting winds rotating out of the south on the eastern side of the storm. Those two winds cancel a little bit, and what that does is it actually slows the storm down because we lose the steering currents, so we could see the storm slowed to a crawl as it's making its way close to onshore, right around the Tampa Bay area, and of course that can exacerbate the storm surge with a longer period of onshore winds and also heavier rain because we're dealing with the rain for a longer period of time. I don't really like any of the model outputs because a lot of them bring them to Florida, and I want this hurricane to go away. It's not going to. What I was trying to say is I'm not a huge fan of the solutions that the models are giving us today. I don't feel like any of the models really have it 100%, but the model that I feel like is probably the most accurate at this point would be the GFS model. You can see the strong Cat 3, Cat 4 hurricane buzzsawing through the southeast Gulf of Mexico and then making a turn late Wednesday evening towards the Tampa Bay area, potentially making landfall in one of these counties here, anywhere from, let's say, Manatee down to Sarasota, perhaps even as far south as Punta Gorda, or it can make landfall in Pinellas County or even up into Pasco County. But I think this zone right here is where the hurricane is most likely going to head for. It is difficult to forecast for multiple reasons. Like I said, we have those big old high pressure systems guiding the storm, and hurricanes also are known for wobbling. Depending on where the most convection is on the storm, that storm may wobble back and forth just a little bit. That's kind of what Irma did a couple of years ago. It wobbled inland and then actually drifted back west a little bit more. So that landfall position will determine whether Tampa Bay, Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, and Tampa Bay itself experiences catastrophic storm surge flooding, or whether we see a track just a tad farther south, which leads to winds blowing from the east and greatly reduces that storm surge threat. That's the GFS model. Here's the rapid refresh model. This is a higher grid model, kind of showing perhaps a little bit more detail. We're just now getting within range of this model, and it looks like, as far out as we can go, 48 hours here, it looks like it wants to bring the storm onshore into Manatee or Sarasota County. And if it did that, you can see perhaps on your screen here, the winds are blowing out of the northeast for the majority of the storm for Tampa Bay, so that would have greatly reduced that 5 to 10 foot storm surge possibility. That, on the other hand, would increase the storm surge forecast for Fort Myers, for Punta Gorda, and for parts of potentially Sarasota in this area. Not to say we wouldn't have a storm surge, but it would be a lesser storm surge for the bay if the eye moves onshore south. So it's only 70 or 80 miles difference between these forecast locations, but it is a world of difference as far as who will be impacted and even the number of people that will be impacted as well. Pinellas County being one of the most populated counties in the entire state, we are looking at the possibility for thousands and thousands of homes and businesses potentially succumbing to storm surge if the hurricane happens to make landfall in Pinellas County or areas just north and gives us those onshore winds. So really, I'll need to continue to monitor that and see how these models are playing out tomorrow. I think we'll be able to hone in on the solution much better. All right, here's a closer look at the GFS model, and you can see there it is, bringing very strong winds. We could see coastal winds on the order of 75, 80, maybe even up to 90. Maybe wind gets to 100 miles per hour, depending on exactly how close the center of circulation gets to land. So strong winds, especially towards the coast, are likely. Heading towards Orlando, not nearly as windy. This is going to be a strong wind event mainly for coastal areas, and then the storm will start to diminish as it moves inland. But yes, wind damage is very likely. Also, a lot of rain is possible in this purple area. According to the GFS, we're looking at the possibility of a foot to 2 feet of rain. So a lot of freshwater flooding is possible near the center of circulation. So be on guard for not only storm surge flooding, but also very heavy rainfall moving into west central Florida along with this storm. Again, hurricanes move or rotate counterclockwise. That means that as the storm's moving along the west Florida border, we're getting onshore winds on the southern part of the storm. You're getting offshore winds on the northern part of the storm, and I can't emphasize how important that is when it comes to the impact that it will have on the storm surge. It won't have that big of a difference on the wind and the rain, but yes, definitely on the storm surge. Here's a look at the European computer model, and it's forecasting some massive waves. In fact, about 50 to 100 miles offshore, we could see waves that are approaching 60 to 70 feet. That means a 6-story building would be completely swamped by a wave if it were 100 miles off the coast. Fortunately, no buildings out there, and there shouldn't be any boats or ships out there either with these massive swells that are moving through. But some of those, obviously not the 70-foot waves, but some large waves will be translating to the coast, so a lot of beach erosion, very rough seas to go along with the storm surge potential as it moves onshore into Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. This is a flashback here. This is Hurricane Irma. I wanted to show you this because a lot of us remember that. You know, it was kind of looking like it was going to bring Tampa Bay some really rough conditions. By Tampa Bay, I mean the actual bay itself, Pinellas County, Manatee County. But it kind of wobbled. The storm wobbled inland, and then it wobbled back west. But a couple of things. First of all, it started farther east, and it made a very sharp turn to the north. Ian, on the other hand, is starting from farther west, from West Cuba, so it's more likely to have much more of an impact on the coastal areas around Manatee, Sarasota, Pinellas County than we saw with Irma. So I think this storm has the potential to be worse. And again, that storm surge is going to be everything. And could be the defining moment of this storm, depending on exactly where that track goes. Let's take a look at the tide forecast. Looking at the tide chart here, unfortunately we're looking at very high astronomical high tides. That's because we're moving into the new moon period. That means the moon and the sun are lined up and they're both pulling on the tides on the water across the world. So we're looking at tides on the order of 3 foot 2 inches for clear water late Wednesday night. That means that in addition to the storm surge, we would get water, high tides that are piling up on that as well. So we're looking at a lot of water, and these would be high tides regardless of the storm. So one of the highest tides of the month. Not a good time to have a storm moving on shore when you're also looking at extremely high tides. That's one reason the Hurricane Center is being very cautious with storm surge. Here's a graphic put out by the Hurricane Center, and again, this is subject to change depending on exactly where the storm does make landfall. But right now, we're looking at quite a bit of storm surge. This is actually called inundation. The blue color is 1 foot of water on what is typically dry land. The yellow is 3 feet of water on what is typically dry land. And the orangish color is 6 feet on top of typically dry land. So if the forecast holds, Longboat Key, areas down on this barrier island west of Sarasota Bay, could be completely inundated. The water could completely cross from the Gulf of Mexico all the way over into the bay. That is what the Hurricane Center is indicating on this map here. And if you'd like to look at this map, it is available on the National Hurricane Center page. They're predicting the same thing happening for Holmes Beach, Bradenton Beach, Anna Maria, the entire island succumbing to water from the storm surge. Same thing for Egmont up through Fort DeSoto. Based on the current track, which has a landfall, again, very important, a landfall in northern Pinellas County, or very close landfall in northern Pinellas County, and eventually towards Homosassa Springs, that would also mean a complete crossing of the water from the Gulf to Boca Ciega Bay, and the entire part of Paso Grill, St. Pete Beach being inundated all the way up through Treasure Island. That also means not only are the effects limited to the immediate coastal areas, but again, as I mentioned, the bay acts like a catcher's mitt, and with those southwest winds, that funnels water in. It has nowhere to go. So MacDill Air Force Base goes underwater. Much of South Tampa, the Gandy, all the bridges go underwater. So do expect all the bridges to be closed, if not by wind, but because of high water. The Gandy and the Courtney Campbell could go underwater as well. Also, could this be the storm that we've talked about? Why did they build a hospital, Tampa General Hospital, on a little island that is prone to storm surge? Could this be the storm where the hospital floods? That's a possibility if the storm makes landfall north of St. Pete Beach. South of St. Pete Beach, probably not flooding the island, but definitely a possibility for Harbor Island and Davis Island, where they landfall to the north. Also, that water is forced to be funneled up into rivers as well. Look at the Hillsborough River here. It's experiencing saltwater intrusion and flooding due to the water being pushed up and having nowhere else to go. So a potentially catastrophic situation if indeed the landfall does occur north of St. Pete Beach. I say catastrophic, really catastrophic for Tampa Bay, Pinellas County. And by Tampa Bay, I mean the bay itself. If it does make landfall a bit farther south, then obviously those storm surges will be reduced. And I think we'll have a good grip on that tomorrow. Here's a cool looking, cool. None of these graphics are cool because none of us want a hurricane, but let's say a useful graphic. This is a brand new graphic created by an acquaintance of mine at the USGS. And you can see here, this is the dune. This is the high level of the beach. This particular beach is Anna Maria Island. And you can see how with that storm surge, they're expecting the water plus the high tide to exceed the dunes and start flooding over into the homes and businesses. And that's something we'll be watching very, very closely. All right, guys, a lot of wind, a lot of rain, storm surge, and isolated tornadoes. We're going to have the possibility for all of it. But I hope to be able to pinpoint with more precision as we head into the day tomorrow. In the meantime, even since starting this video, you can see that we are starting to get an inner eye wall developing, so the storm is intensifying very quickly. All right, guys, better to prepare and end up having nothing than to regret it and end up in endangering your property and your lives. So please do prepare and make any plans you can. Listen to local officials and the Hurricane Center and evacuate if the local officials are recommending it. All right, guys, I'll have another update a bit later. Stay safe.